Welcome to the UI Experience. Welcome to the UI Experience.
And good afternoon, urban intellectuals and those out there in web listening land. This is yours truly, Jalal Tariq, with the latest installment of Real Talk with Jalal Tariq for this Monday, November the 3rd, 2014. Yes, another month has went by, and it's time to start something new. And last Friday, it just so happens, by luck of the draw, I ended up with a show that was basically all my sisters. And today, on the other hand, I have a show that's all the brothers. So we get off today. In any event, I'm joined by my usual partners in consciousness, TB and Patrick. They're both here, and I'm also joined by one of my frequent contributors, and I like to call him my special guest, Professor Carl Tone Jones. Say hi. Say hello to the people.
Peace and blessings.
What's
Peace
happening?
And blessings, brothers and sisters. Black power.
Black power. Anyway, I wonder where that ever came from. We'll have to deal with that one day. As usual, before we start our show, I usually start with my usual request that those who like what you hear and would like to contribute to our ongoing cause and our ongoing efforts to raise the consciousness of our nation, to go to urbanintellectuals.com/members, and for the low price of $24 a year, you can become a card-carrying member of Urban Intellectuals. Or if you just want to give to your heart's content, you can go to urbanintellectuals/donate, and you can basically further our cause, and you can spend as much money as your heart desires. Now, with that, let's jump straight into our topics. What is topic number one today? Was going to be topic number two, but we're going to bump it up a little bit because there seems to be somewhat of a interest being shown in this particular subject. The subject originally, I don't even know how they even got that off of what I posted yesterday when I was doing my show board, is the differences between us as black men and black women, and them as black women and us as black men, depending on who has the problem with who and what the particular subject is. So I thought I would rephrase this particular question, and I would come at it from this point of view. Compromise. Why is that a dirty word with black men and black women? And let me preface this particular question like this. Take myself and my wife, for instance. We could talk about a certain subject, and usually the end of the conversation usually comes somewhere around, you just don't get it. Usually from black women to black men. Is it true that we just don't get it, though? Because we say, hey, I understand what you're saying. I might not agree with what you're saying, but I understand what you're saying. And in my estimation, just me, I'm just going to say me, in my estimation, I actually think that when we say, or when women say we just don't get it, and we say we do, they don't believe us. Or if we say, okay, I get what you're saying, they say, you can't possibly get what I'm saying because you haven't conformed your behavior to something that I want. Carl, I'm going to go to you first. Compromise. How come we can't compromise with our queens?
Damn. That's a good question. And I think I was kind of hoping you came to me last. But to dig into that, there's a lot of pain in our struggle and a lot of pride, too, because, we wouldn't be where we are today as people if we didn't have to persevere through some things, if we didn't have it in us. But the process has left a lot of scabs, a lot of open wounds. And particularly, the relationship between black men and black women have always been in a position in this country in particular where they felt as though they have not been protected for or provided for by black men. And there's a historical relevance to this, or preference to this, prevalence to this, excuse me, my cat's trying to trip me while I walk. But the historical prevalence to this is the fact that, we've always, our women have always had to be in some type of situation where they've been defensive, or they've had to be defended, or they've been isolated, or they've been victimized. And we, for some reason, a lot of us brothers don't want to own up to that, to the fact that we owe our women a debt. That being said, I think the pain comes into play when we acknowledge that there's an issue that needs to be discussed, and the sisters are not satisfied with the emotional response that we give them or lack of an emotional response that we give them when we respond to it. As you say, okay, well, I understand. No, you don't understand, because I'm still hurting, and I'm speaking as a black woman, and I can't honestly say that I know exactly what a black woman feels like, but this is just going on in my head. You can't understand how we're feeling because you're not emotionally attached to the situation like I am. I don't see the emotional response on your behalf. Therefore, you can't possibly see what's going on. So there's a lot of resentment involved and a lot of pain. And the thing about pain is, unless you're the one going through it, you really don't have any idea as to how much pain that other person's in, how much anguish that person's dealing with, or how they're interpreting your responses or empathy or lack of empathy to their situations. In a nutshell.
Good point. Good point. Patrick, what's your answer?
My answer to repeat the question, please, sir.
Compromise. Why
can't we compromise?
Right. How come we can't just even sit down and agree for a framework of how we gonna talk about the problems, let alone the problem itself?
I think the professor hit on a lot of very valid points. I think, like he said, we're on both sides. There's been a lot of damage. There's been a lot of sacrifice. There's been a lot historically that has happened to black men and women, and the gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And nowadays, everybody's so hypersensitive. Everybody's so hyper defensive about everything. Especially in the black conscious communities, which ironically are supposed to be the communities that are going to lead our intellectual charge, because I personally find that the more steeped in the history a group of people are, the bigger the divide seems to be between the men and the women on issues of modern gender issues. Those that are relatively unconscious, they might say or do some messed up things, but for the most part, they can still at least talk to each other. But I think it's just a difference in experiences and a difference in worldview, and more importantly, a lack of ability to define their own experiences in terms that the other side can understand. Men aren't very emotional. We're kind of logical. So when we talk about things, and it's not to say one is better than the other, it's definitely not. But when we talk about things, we tend to try and rationalize things or break things down logically. And women tend to have a more emotional response. And so when we're talking about things with each other, it's kind of the same when you talk about something to your woman and she gets it, but she responds emotionally instead of responding logically. You're kind of looking at her like, well, you don't get it. And it's the same thing for women. When we're talking and they're breaking something down for us emotionally and we respond logically, they're kind of like, well, you don't get it. But then, too, I think there's this other dynamic of nobody really wants to admit fault. Like, nobody really wants to say, you know what, which is, if you can't connect with somebody through words alone or whatever the case may be, another tactic is always to say, well, you know what, I'm sorry. I did this wrong, I did that wrong. And then you can come back around and say, it's just that when you did this, that, and the third, it made me feel like this. So we have to be very careful with our wording. And nobody really wants to be careful with their words. Everybody wants to be straight talk, no chaser, no BS, blah, blah, blah. Everybody wants to keep it real and deliver the truth and this, that, and the third, message be upon you, truth, whatever, whatever, whatever. And nobody is really sitting back and understanding, yeah, look, but with all the truth you spitting, you have no audience. Nobody's listening. So we have to get to the point where, and I honestly feel like men should take this step if we want to be leaders in our communities the way we say we are. We have to get to a point where we can drop our walls and listen to our women and then say, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry, blah, 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 blah. However, when blah, blah, blah. It was interesting. I watched the documentary Dark Girls on Netflix last night at the request of somebody. And it's a decent documentary. I didn't really, there shouldn't be anything in there that's going to teach people anything, or teach most of the conscious community anything about historically what's happened. But what is interesting is the reaction that I felt coming up in myself as a man watching this, especially as an extremely dark man watching this documentary about dark women telling their story. And the first reaction I had coming up was that, you know what? Why are they singling out women and acting like women are the only ones that have this problem? Like, my self-esteem was low for being dark-skinned. Wasn't nobody running up to be my friend because I was dark-skinned. I got called all the same names they got called. I got called, I got called Tar Baby and Pitch Black and Midnight Oil and all these other things. And, people still ask me if I'm from Ethiopia or someplace in Africa. When I tell people I was born and raised in America, they kind of look at me like I'm lying. You got to be lying. You just learned to hide your accent pretty good. And then in that response, I had to check myself and I had to notice, look, that's just these sisters telling their story. What are you getting defensive about? You're not even talking. You're just watching the documentary. Why are you getting defensive about this? And so in that, you can begin to think, if I'm somebody, and I routinely have to check these feelings within myself when I'm reading comments from women. I routinely have to stop myself and say, what are you getting defensive about? This person is telling their reality. Just accept it and incorporate it and move forward. So if me, somebody who's studying and writing books and doing lectures on the black relationship and the gap we have between black men and black women, is struggling with this concept, I can only imagine how people are struggling with this concept who really don't give too much thought to it at all.
Okay. Gary.
All right. Can we compromise? The obvious answer is yes, we can compromise. I mean, we're grown folks. We're adults. We all are educated, and we should be able to sit down and talk to each other. Now, for the ones who don't, there are certain issues that they have that need to be addressed. And for the men, I think it involves their ego more than anything. I think it's just being a man and wanting to be right and have the woman listen to what, I've got to say, and I'm going to say my piece, and you're going to listen. So ego has a lot to do with men who don't want to sit down with the ladies that they love and be able to discuss the things that are on their minds. For the ladies, I see it as, they have to leave their attitude at the door when they want to sit down and talk with us. And I see that a lot of women bring that mother instinct to the conversation where they want to scold the man rather than listen to the man. You notice when a lot of women talk to us, they talk like loud at us, like they're scolding us, as opposed to just coming to the table. We sit down and here's my points of view. This is the way I see it, just based on my life's experiences. And then she says, well, this is the way I see it, baby, based on my life's experiences. So I think it just comes down to us being able to let go of our egos, them let go of their motherly instinct to want to scold us for what we've done wrong, and just sit down and say, hey, let's get a dialogue going, because this actually benefits the white race to have black men and black women go at each other, because it prevents us from being able to unify our families. It prevents us from being able to move forward as black people with the black man and the black woman down for each other. See, it helps them because now some black men are running to the white race to try to assimilate and marry them, and so black women are doing the same thing, running to find some white man to marry and be with him and letting each other go. And then what you get is now you're going to turn around and start talking against black people once you run out and started to mix and mingle with white folks. So for me, I just think it can be done. You have to let your attitudes, your egos, the motherly instinct and all that, just leave it alone and bring your own level of maturity to the table, and don't try to win the argument. No, there's no winner. This isn't football. This isn't basketball. You're not trying to win the national championship of arguments. You're just trying to sit down and get a dialogue going where we can say, hey, let's figure out how we can come together. And that's what I would hope we would be able to do.
Okay, let me flip the script a little bit and go back to something that Patrick mentioned. Logic versus feelings. We had this basic thought process that women are more emotional creatures and men are more logical creatures. Although we could argue back and forth about whether or not that's true and to what extent that's true. I'm sorry versus I'll change. One of the gripes that we hear from our queens all the time is that if you sorry, why did you do it again? Or if you sorry, why do you continue down this path of bad behavior, or what I deem to be bad behavior? Is it, or how do you make this not sound like lip service when you say, I get it? Because you have a lot of brothers that'll say, I get it and I'm sorry, when they actually really don't. Because it's hard for me as a man to understand what Terry going through. Another man. He could tell me his particular situation. I could say I empathize with you all day long, but there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. And what we actually define as empathy is actually sympathy. Sympathize with you, Terry. You know what I mean? Your girl left you, your dog died, your car just went, belly up on you, whatever. I sympathize with you, but I can't empathize with you because I'm not in that same exact situation. It's even worse with a woman. So the question now becomes, which one is more important to say? I'm sorry or I'll change? Carl.
Well, we learn from those of us who got to watch relationships growing up. We learned that I'm sorry was a quick way to end an argument that we couldn't win. So I think the I change part is real. And to touch on something that was said a few minutes ago, I don't think that we truly understand the power of social engineering and the power that and the ability for it to take place or displace us when it comes to our relationships and how we see each other. And so to answer your first question, yes, I believe we should change it from, I'm sorry to I'll change, and then go to working towards understanding what does that change entail. But I think a deeper probe into that question is, well, what are the expectations of us when we get into these relationships that are making them so difficult to work, or making it so difficult for us to relate? And I think one of the things is that we're going into these relationships based off of expectations and criteria rather than actually getting to know and love people, courtship and things of that nature, things that we used to do. We've moved past those stages. We're like a microwave generation in terms of going straight from we don't want to go around the whole Monopoly board to collect $200, and that $200 is readily available to us even if we don't. So, and what I mean by that is we have fast forwarded the dating process in our community, and we've totally gotten around the concepts of trying to figure out who exactly is going to be the right match for us, who's going to be a good partner for us, rather than we size each other up and we create these criteria. And for men, it's more physical. For women, it's more tactical when it comes to when you ask a woman, well, what does she want in a man? It used to be, I want a man that's going to love me, respect me, this, that, and the other. But when you ask a woman now, it's like, well, his FICO score has to be 700. He has to have good credit. He has to have a certain amount of degrees. He has to be making this amount of money. He has to be this type of, this level of independence. So now you're dating that stature, and what you've effectively done is eliminate a lot of brothers. On the other hand, and you ask men on the same token, and they'll tell you physical attributes, or they'll tell you some things that they don't want out of their women. They don't want the nagging. They don't want a woman that's had children with more than one person. We have these things. So we have all of these things, all these things put in place. And I think Brother Terry made an astute point when he stated, and when he pointed out that, this all benefits white supremacy, and this is all by design, to have us at each other's throats and to have us in dysfunctional relationships. That's why the successful black women are all dating white men on TV, and that's why the unsuccessful or the black couples that are supposedly together, we're watching Love and Hip Hop. These things are being sold to us. So the answer to the first question, not to be long-winded, is yes, we need to figure out how to change. But first of all, we need to figure out, well, what are the actual parameters behind us and our courtship of each other in the first place?
Okay, good point. Now I got another question though, and I'm gonna let you answer that question as well, Patrick. Is it more important to say I'm sorry or I'll change? But I want to throw another question B in there. Speaking of expectations, is it really reality for us to expect our relationships to be like our parents? And this is the reason why I asked that. Me and my wife been together for 10 years. Been married for over 8. And is every day a happy day? Does every day when I come home, if I didn't work at home, but anyway, when I come home from work, does she have my slippers and my pipe and the newspaper and dinner's ready and the kids are clean and everybody is just all hunky-dory or whatever? No. Did my parents have a perfect relationship? Did they never fight? Did they never argue? Did they never spend time away from each other? You know what I mean? I remember my mom and my father like, nigga, get out of here. You know what I mean? And he'd be gone for a day or two or whatever. Then he'd come back because if he didn't leave, she was going to kill him. But that's a whole other story. Is our expectations too high? Are we looking for something that's not actually relevant anymore? Because the way, like the professor said, the way our society is driving us as a people, it's almost impossible to have that particular type of relationship with our queens to this certain point now. But that's my question to you, Patrick. Is it unrealistic for us to expect our relationships to be like our parents, along with which one is more important? I'm sorry or I'll change.
I think in regards to the first question, I think it's important to understand what some people mean when they say I'm sorry. They're not saying I'm sorry for what I did. They're saying I'm sorry I made you feel that way. And in saying I'm sorry I made you feel that way, that doesn't imply that I'm going to change. That just implies that I feel bad that I made you feel that way. And in a lot of regards, from my discussions with women, especially those who just want to understand, it's not necessarily, we men always get caught up in trying to understand, well, what could I do what action can I take? And for a lot of women, I'm beginning to find out that the more and more I talk to them anyways, that it's not necessarily always about you taking an action. Sometimes it's just about you acknowledging that you've done something. Sometimes it's just about you being open and honest with her. Sometimes it's just about some of those real intangible things that as men we view as, whatever. but to women, it's kind of like it makes a world of difference. You see what I'm saying? So in that, we can't get caught up on, because that's going back into man mode of see a problem, fix a problem. I see a problem, I need to do something to fix a problem. And we have to understand that, like I said earlier, not all women actually want you to do anything. Some of them just want to be heard, which is what prompted us to start the Bridging the Gap call altogether anyway, was because after a lecture, I had read my apology to black women, and a woman stood up and said, she was in tears, and she said, I just want to be heard. She didn't want any man to do anything for her outside of sit down and listen to her and really try to understand what she was going through. So my answer to the first question is I really think it depends on the situation and the woman. I don't think that saying I'll change is always the best answer, because sometimes your response to your follow-up to the I'm sorry has to be an explanation that she can understand for why you feel or why you maneuver or why you do the things you do. If she can gain an understanding of that, change might not be necessary. You have to place all the cards on the table before you start throwing them out the deck. So, we have to evaluate the situation more closely before we just jump to saying I'll change. And in that, I think we should always start with I'm sorry, because I'm sorry does deal with the emotional aspect of it, the hurt feelings aspect of it. I am truly sorry that I hurt your feelings. Now, let's talk about this behavior and this change that you may or may not be wanting. In regards to the second question, we talked about this actually on the Bridging the Gap show about the expectations of both men and women in relationships. And honestly, I don't think that it's completely logical or rational or fair to assume that we're going to have the same level of relationships that our parents had. Ideally, you want the level of relationships to grow with each generation, people to be able to get more intimate, to be able to have more free time, to be more infatuated with each other than they were in the past generations, because typically we're having to work less and less to make ends meet. Well, that was the case until, about the mid-2000s. But each generation typically had to work a little bit less than their parents had to work, which left a little bit more free time to experience life for the average American. Again, we all know there are exceptions to the rules. So in that, and with the environmental factors and the social factors and the culture factors that are in place, the economic factors that are in place that have a lot to do with how you experience your relationship, it's just not ideal to think that you're going to have the exact same relationship as your parents. And I think even deeper than that, for those of us who didn't grow up with two-parent households, to actually see mom and dad interact like that, the movies we watch, we talked, the women talked in the Bridging the Gap show about the Disney Channel, the cartoons, the Cinderellas, the Snow Whites, all of these shows where they were expecting that they got taught at a very young age, and by the time they grew up, they didn't realize that, they had been taught to look for a white knight. Now, there were some women that disagreed, but the majority of the women all confirmed that when they first started getting into relationships, they were looking for a white knight because that's what they had seen all their lives from a young child up. They were a princess stuck in the castle, and their white knight was going to come and rescue them. Is that realistic, especially if you're a black woman? No. I mean, you see, even in the Disney cartoons, the black woman got the broke prince. If you look at the Louisiana, the movie they made about the Princess and the Frog that was black based off New Orleans, the only broke prince in the world, and he ended up with a black woman, where she still got to work to open her restaurant to take care of him, and he's a prince. More than likely, unfortunately, for black women, you're going to have that reality more than you're going to have the white knight come. And that's not a bad reality to have, because the prince was still working. He was working with her, and they were building something together. But when it comes to expectations, there's just so many different things to go into that. I don't personally think that it's fair or even rational to assume that you're going to have the exact same relationship your parents had. Each generation, we need to redefine what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and what's expected of our children. That needs to happen every generation, so that we can make sure that the things that we're doing nowadays are going to benefit us in the future and actually have some real relevance outside of just being antiquated parts of our history that we should be remembering, but there's no longer any value in practicing. Does that make sense?
That makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. And I'm going to drill down a little bit more on that before I move to you, Terry. You are correct. You are absolutely 100% correct. And I don't want people who might be listening to this, these young brothers, to think that just saying I'm sorry makes the problem go away. Because the worst thing that you ever want to be in, the worst position that you will ever find yourself in, is you and your girl have an argument about something, and you say, baby, I'm sorry. And she look at you and she say, what are you sorry for? Ever had that happen to you? And now you are put in a position where, you caught out there because you've been listening to this for the last half an hour. You ain't heard jack. You know what I mean? You thinking about whether or not the Browns is beating the Bengals. So you wondering whether or not Kobe gonna get 40 tonight. You thinking about a whole hell of a lot of things other than what she talking about. So you got to be careful with that word I'm sorry. And you also got to be careful with that word I'll change too. Because like you alluded to, this unrealistic view that we have of what our parents were, two-parent household, yada, yada, yada. This is one of the problems that I see. Our parents were successful. Our parents had 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old marriages because they learned that I'm not always going to get my way. You're not always going to get your way. If we bump heads, we don't give up. Today's generation, man, I found out that brother was blah, 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 blah. Or I found out that she don't do this, that, this, and the other. So they give up on the relationship and they go their separate ways. It could be 6 months into it. It could be a year into it. It could be anywhere within the first 5 years. Because what's the stats say? That most marriages fail within the first 5 years because of finances, because of this, because of that. No, the professor was speaking to that as far as having to have a certain FICO score or whatever. So I would think that, like you said, we need to get out of this expectation that everything is going to be the same as it was with our parents. It's not. Because we don't have that type of patience with each other. Patience and compromise will do more for making your relationship go further than anything else in the world. Money, it doesn't matter. Faithfulness, it doesn't matter. If you don't have patience and the ability to compromise, your relationship will probably end early. Terry, I'm sorry versus I'll change.
Both need to be involved. Here's the thing. Sorry involves humility. Okay, and so again, sometimes we men have that ego. Our chest is stuck out, we don't lift the weights and we all strong and we ain't saying I'm sorry to nobody. So we've got to learn to humble ourselves first. And if you're able to be humble and realize that it's not a win versus lose argument that you should be having with your woman in the first place, then you'd be able to say I'm sorry. But in order to say I'm sorry, that involves responsibility. That means that you got to recognize that you've done something wrong. And a lot of times the way that men are raised, they don't even realize what it was that they've done wrong because they've seen it be done before by men who raised them, aunts, their uncles and Junebug and all these people. So they think that the behavior is normal. So that's what you'd have to do first. Now, when it comes to change itself, yes, you need to change your behavior if you've done something wrong. That means you got to change the way that you think about the problem. You got to change the way that you learn to attack, deal with, or resolve the problem. All of us, when we were in school, we had a certain subject that may have been a little tough for us. And we're like, man, this is a tough subject. But we eventually learned to at least be able to get a C out of that subject because we did what? We changed the way that we thought about the subject matter, and we changed the way that we learned to resolve the subject matter's problems. So it's the same with the relationship with our women. We've got to learn how to change the way that we think about the behavior when we're dealing with our ladies if we've done something wrong. As far as the second question, there's no way, and all of us are in consensus agreement with this, there's no way that what's happening in 2014, you can't deal with that in terms of 1974, and you can't deal with that in terms of 1934. The requirements of each generation will change as society increases its needs for things. For example, we're a different generation now than we were in 74, than we were in 34. So, yes, the foundations of the relationships are going to change, even though the basis of the relationship will never change. The man and the woman get together, and they agree that they're going to help each other to live, and if they have children, they're both going to do their part to take care of their children and their household. That's the basic foundation that will never change. But then this is 2014, so women are now out in the workforce working, whereas they weren't doing that in the same numbers in 74. And they certainly weren't doing it in the same numbers back in 44. The men were out in the factories and the shipyards and things working, while the women stayed at home and raised the children. So it's just ridiculous for anyone to think that you can have the same expectations today as we did back then.
Good point. So I'm going to go back to you, Professor Carl. What's the answer? With everything, what's the answer? What's the solution?
Well, I think the solution is for us to start talking more so openly, but also just as Brother Terry said, Brother Patrick was saying, we have to be, humble with the conversation and accept accountability. And I know it's not the same topic, but when I go out and I speak and I get into high schools, or I speak and I do lectures, the first thing I do is apologize to the youth because they're in situations where, I feel as though it's unfair to them and that we owe them a debt. Well, I've often said that as black men, we owe our women a debt because they have been put in situations that we need to be more responsible about accepting, our role in that. The single households, they played a role too in a little bit, but, if we're just talking about being accountable, I think we need to be honest about how we're accountable for each other. And I think we need to accept that there are outside forces that play a part in what happens to us. There are outside forces. In Philadelphia, we have the Department of Human Services, other places, DHS, the Children Youth Services, they come in, they break up your household. They have social workers, things of that nature. The whole drug epidemic destroyed destroyed the fabric of our communities, and it put a lot of our young brothers in jail. It made a lot of our young sisters users. So, we've accepted and become a part of a dynamic and a paradigm for which we've allowed outside influences to come into our neighborhoods and our communities and determine what we are and how we're supposed to communicate with one another instead of actually seeking that out for ourselves, going back in our past. And, just as times have changed, we have to adapt to those changes, and we have to be more open to having the conversation. It shouldn't be a closed-door situation. So every situation that a sister can talk about a black man doing her dirty, I could bring that situation up to and attribute to my personal experiences. Same thing is, everything I'm thinking about a sister and what sisters are going through, or sisters that put brothers through, sisters can come to the table with the same arguments about what they have been put through by brothers. So the bottom line is we've all been going through it together, so we need to come out of it together and work towards meeting toward the middle, because the only way we're going to even survive is if, and I'm talking about as a people, is if we're conscious enough to recognize that we need one another to survive. And just let me throw one more tidbit in, and I'm done talking. The whole concept of consciousness, I think, is skewed, because I think while we have a whole lot of intelligent people, there's a difference between being intelligent and being conscious. And you can be intelligent, but be dumb as hell when it comes to having consciousness, and vice versa. So I think we need to bridge that gap in terms of having an open conversation, and I think we all at some point will have to get off of our high horses, sit down and be the recipient of the information that's being displayed, take it all in, and be a part of the solution.
Okay. Patrick, it's funny too, because that was part of it that I wanted to add to the discussion from earlier on, but we might devote another show to it. Write that down. Consciousness. Have you ever noticed that most of the head-butting that goes on, like on OpenDisc or on the UI.com page or whatever, is usually between people who are conscious? So, like I said, we'll deal with that on a different day. But Patrick, give me a solution. Solve this issue for everybody in America right now.
Well, to be honest, I'm not really interested in solving the issue for white people, so I'll solve it for black people. I'm joking, of course, but not really.
No, you're not.
Like I said, I'm shamelessly plugging my book to death. I have a book coming out on this very subject. And in that book, I detail some solutions, as all good books should at the end, detail some solutions. And one of the things I think that we need to do as black people is, one, I think very first up, we need to have an open and honest dialogue about how we're feeling. And in that, I mean, you need to keep your walls down. You need to do the best you can to keep from getting defensive and to keep on listening and receiving what people are saying. And when I say people, and I put all the onus, I put all the responsibility for this on men to take that first step. And the reason why is because men are supposed to be, we claim, we love to beat our chests and announce that we're the leaders of the community. You know what I'm saying? Okay, well, if you're the leader of the community, step up and do your damn job. In this case, that means ensuring that you understand and you have heard everybody in your community, even when what they have to say is not necessarily something that is favorable to you. So I think we have to start there. We have to get out of this double victim mentality. Two victims can't do nothing for each other but get in the pissing contest and piss each other off. We got to get out of this double victim mentality. Somebody has to step up and say, you know what, I'm not a victim. Even though we as a community have been victimized, and even though we have been through situations, two victims cannot build anything with each other while they both still hold that victim mentality, especially when they're both blaming, like they both see the other one as the source of their victimhood. So we have to get out of that mentality. We really need to redefine what it means to be men and what it means to be women. And I'm going to attack men again on this front and say, from every conversation I've had, women have been trying to redefine their roles. They really have. Men have kind of been resistant to the change, which creates another disconnect. Because you hear men nowadays talking about they want those women from the 1920s. They want those women from the 1930s. They want those old school stay-at-home, dress covered up, blah, blah, blah. They want those women in bulk. They want the woman that's a virgin that ain't never been with nobody. They want this, that, and the third. And you kind of look at them, and even as a man, you're like, there's a section of you that's like, yeah, that's true, I want that. But then you have to look and say, but it's 2014, bruh. Like, it's not 1930. It's 2014. Women are more often than not going to have a job. The majority of them are going to make more than the men that they're paired with. That's a sad reality. Sorry. They're going to be the primary breadwinners. They're going to have been in multiple relationships in the past. They're probably going to come with some children. They're going to come with these things already. Now, I'm not saying there aren't any women that don't, But this is 2014. This is not just a black issue. This is a woman thing, period. They're going to come with these things. Now, in the white communities, the men are more likely to be employed and more likely to make a lot more money, so you don't necessarily have the women primary breadwinner issue, but you still have the rising rates of single motherhood. So this is something that we're going to have to come to grips with, and we have to stop attacking women for having a past. And we have to stop attacking women for doing some of the things that don't necessarily agree with our antiquated idea of what it means to be a woman. And here's another thing. Women have to stop defining what it means to be a man, and men have to stop defining what it needs to be a woman, and they both need to come together to define what it means to be a child. And when I start talking about that, I'm talking about reclaiming our images within our own community. I'm talking about establishing and defining our own cultures and our own stereotypes. I'm talking about figuring out how the family of 2014 is going to work and interact with each other and with the world around it. You know, those are some of the things that I think we have to really begin to do. And again, as always, I put the burden of initiation squarely on the shoulders of men. I'm not saying we have to build a whole bridge ourselves, but we should at least turn around first and take the first few steps. Now, and doing that, who knows, you know, we might get to a point where by the time the women turn around and start to acknowledge us, we're already right there and we've been behind them the whole time, which I think is a very big possibility. But if women can see more men actively trying to do things, to redefine the stereotypes, to this, to that, the other thing, because another thing I got from watching that documentary Dark Girls is there are a lot of people that really don't understand colorism and the role it plays in our communities and the impact that it has on our culture. And there are a lot of men out there who make the gap even bigger by saying that they won't date dark-skinned girls, or they don't like dark-skinned girls, and women that don't help by saying they don't want dark babies, this, that, and the third. Like, all of that ties in. You understand it? It all goes into this culture. And we have to address it at the root. And I really feel like, again, and I'm going to be done after I say this, I really feel like it's on men to take that first step. If we're going to be the leaders of the community, then goddamn it, it's time to start leading.
TB, as usual, you get the last. Well, I get the last word, but you get the last word on this particular subject.
All right.
Solve the problem for you, bro.
All right. Both of the brothers came up with very viable solutions. I just hope that people are listening and paying attention, and instead of just hearing the argument, I hope it actually listen to what Carl said and listen to what Patrick just said. My answer starts out like this. I think women need to sit down and be quiet, and I think men need to talk. That's the one thing I always hear when I hear women say what the problem is of men. The men don't talk about their problems. They keep them to themselves, or they talk to their boys about it. But then from men, I hear, she won't be quiet, man. Every time I try to talk, she talk over me. As soon as I try to say something, she got to rebut everything I'm saying. So I get frustrated and I don't say nothing. I shut down. So if we are going to resolve the issue, you can start today by finding someone who you wronged, or if there's someone you're in a relationship with and there's some issues that you all need to work out, start today. Sit down, find the time to talk, where she is not going to try to be your mother. She is not going to scold you in the conversation. She's actually going to be quiet. And that's very difficult for women to do. But I just want you to just let the man talk. And then for him, don't try to make it be about you. Don't interject your masculinity into the conversation. Just explain your points of view, where you've been wrong, how you've been wrong, the reasons why. If it goes back to childhood where you saw your mama beat your daddy and so on and so forth, explain yourself so that she really can connect with what you really are feeling in your soul, not off the top of your skull, and not something based on what you heard in the bar when you was drinking, but based on what's in your own soul. As a man, explain yourself to her so that she can and then really begin to relate to why you think the way you think. And so it just comes down to that very simple concept without even needing to have an education. A lot of our grandparents didn't have college educations, but they learned how to be in relationships, and they were successful at them. So this doesn't require you to be intelligent with PhDs and baccalaureate degrees and all of this stuff. It just needs you to have common sense logic to want to sit down and hear each other's points of view.
Good point. If you ask me, and all of the, just taking all of what you brothers say and just putting all of that in one big old bag, but this is going to be the twist tie at the top of it. First, I think that what we need to do is we need to have a serious discussion of what we're talking about. Because in some situations, it seems one of the complaints that I hear from the brothers that I talk to is that women are piss poor explainers and men are piss poor listeners of what the issue actually is. And what I mean by that is that an argument will start about one thing, and by the time the next hour rolls by, the argument will be about something entirely different. We'll start talking about something I did on Monday, but by the time the argument is in, now it's what I did on last Thursday and last month and 6 years ago or what have you. Now, as men, we need to stop being so dense. Like your brother said, I don't know which one of you, I think it was Terry, we need to put down our bulletproof armor. We need to get down off of our high horse and stop thinking that because we are the man and we are the quote-unquote king of the castle, that means that we can't be corrected, that nobody should ever have a problem with anything that I do because I'm the man and I make the decisions. That's not how life works anymore. It used to be, but that's not how life works anymore, because, you know, that leads to that sister out there that makes more money than you and say, okay, king, I tell you what. You know what I mean? So we need to stop being so dense. We need to study our women like we studied for our school exams. Like Terry said, you know, this is not about having a master's degree or, you know, being a bachelor or whatever. We need to be PhDs in our women. We need to understand our women like we understand advanced mathematics. And because, and I point, like they say, when you point your fingers at somebody, you know, there's 4 pointing back, 3 pointing back at you, the thumb don't count, whatever. I'll even admit, you know, I'm smart as hell. I'm probably one of the smartest people you probably ever meet. But when it comes to women, especially my wife, stupid. Just stupid. Been together 10 years. Still fucking up like I was like married to her for 6 months. But that comes with the territory. And the lasting relationships are those ones that take those speed bumps and those hurdles and those obstacles and either find a way around them, over them, or through them. And never let the argument or the particular problem become bigger than the relationship. That's one of the other things that I think is a solution. Okay, me and you got a problem. I'm doing this, you doing that, whatever the issue that we might be arguing about. Basic, simple question. Is it more important than our family? Is it more important than our relationship? Because if it's not as important of our relationship, then we'll deal with it. You know, and then that includes cheating. That includes domestic abuse. That includes whatever problem you might be having in your relationship. Is it bigger than the relationship it is? And in some cases it is. Some people, hey, they can't get around to cheating. Some people can't get around to domestic violence. If it is, it is. You know, hey, you go your way, I go my way. But I've seen way too many relationships break up over nonsense. Break up over things that our parents and our grandparents wouldn't have given a second thought. Yeah, they'd have thought about it. And the next day, life would have went on like it never happened. Because there's that forgiveness that's there. We as men also need to stop attacking women for having an opinion about something. You got brothers out there that swear up and down, yeah, man, I love my lady, man, you know what I mean? Me and her, we get along well, but let her say something that you don't agree with. Now she becomes the enemy. Now everything that I say and every argument that I have will be directed toward her personally and breaking down her particular position. Women are allowed to have opinions, just like we are allowed to have opinions. Sisters. Sometimes when we say we get it, we actually do get it. No, you don't get it. Okay, what can I say to make you think that I get it? That's where they get you with that question. Well, if you get it, then tell me what I just said. Which part of the conversation? You've been talking for an hour and a half. Which part of the conversation do you want me to repeat to you? You know, but all in all, I think it's like I say, it's just a matter of communications. You know, if you want a long-term relationship, straight up, going toward both parties, if you want a long-term relationship, you got to talk to each other. Because if you don't talk to each other, you're doomed to failure. Because until Google or Facebook or whoever creates that particular cap that you could put on so we could read each other's minds, you will never know what I'm thinking, and I'll never know what you're thinking unless we ask each other and we talk about it. So, with that, it is now 2 o'clock, and this hour has went so fast and was so chock full of good information that we never even got to topic 2 that was topic 1. We'll talk about vaccinations tomorrow. That way, give everybody a chance to do a little bit more research on it if they want to join in. But I think it was a productive conversation, and I'm quite sure that we'll hear more from everybody in the rooms and on UI, what have you. I want to thank all my guests, Patrick, Terry, Professor Carl, Tone Jones. I got, a few thousand other people that's on the call list that I'm looking at. I want to thank everybody out there in listening land that took time out of their busy day to put on their earphones at work or dial me up on the PC when you're not doing something, cleaning up the house or whatever, to listen to us run off at the mouth. As usual, I usually end my show like I begin my show. I implore you, I beg you, I request that you go to urbanintellectuals.com/members, whether for the low price of $24, you can become a card-carrying member of Urban Intellectuals, or go to urbanintellectuals.com/donate, and you can give to your heart's content. As I said, we didn't get to our other topic today, so the topic tomorrow will be vaccinations, whether or not it's smart for us as a nation to vaccinate our kids the way we vaccinate our kids. Again, join me tomorrow, top of the 1 o'clock hour. And for all of my guests and for all of my co-hosts, I say peace and blessings to everybody out there in listening land, and you guys have a wonderful day.